My daughter texted me, "Skip my wedding, hubby hates you." I read that message standing in my own kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, and instead of falling apart, I smiled. Then I picked up my phone and made one call that froze every account those two people depended on to survive. By dawn, their phones would not stop ringing. 118 missed calls, all from the same two people who thought they didn't need me anymore. My name is Frank Coleman. I'm 58 years old, and I run a heating and cooling company in Pittsburgh that I built from nothing but a used van and a toolbox. I'm not a rich man by accident. Every dollar I have came from crawling through attics in July and freezing my hands off in basements in January, one job at a time, for over 30 years. I never went to college. I never had connections. What I had was a daughter named Emily, and after her mother passed when Emily was 7 years old, I had a reason to get up every single morning, even when I didn't feel like it. Raising a little girl alone while running a business isn't something people write songs about, but it's the hardest and most honest work I've ever done. I learned to braid hair from a video on my lunch break. I learned to sign permission slips and cook dinner and still show up for every single school play, sitting in a folding chair in the back row in my work boots because I didn't have time to change. Emily grew up watching me get up before the sun and come home covered in dust, and she never once complained about it because she knew exactly why I was doing it. I built that company for her. Every contract I signed, every truck I bought, every employee I hired, it was all so that one day my daughter would never have to worry about money the way I did as a kid. By the time she turned 25, Coleman Heating and Cooling had 4 trucks, 12 employees, and a reputation across 3 counties. I had done what I set out to do. I had built something real. What I didn't expect was that the same hands that built all of it would one day have to tear it down to save my own daughter from herself. People think being a single father is about the big moments, the graduations, the father-daughter dances, but it's really about the small days nobody remembers. It's about being the only parent who shows up to a parent-teacher conference and sitting across from a teacher alone while other kids have 2 chairs filled. It's about learning that Emily hated tomatoes and loved rainy days, and that she cried at the ending of every single movie, no matter how many times she'd seen it. I never dated much when she was young. I told myself it was because I was too busy, and that was partly true. But the real reason was I didn't want to bring anyone into our house who might make Emily feel like she was sharing me. She had already lost her mother. I wasn't going to let her feel like she was losing pieces of me too. We had a routine. Every Sunday night, no matter how tired I was from a 60-hour work week, we ate dinner together at the kitchen table. No phones, no television, just the two of us talking about her week. She used to tell me everything back then, every friend group drama, every teacher she liked, every dream she had about becoming a veterinarian, then a teacher, then a lawyer. I listened to every version of who she wanted to become, because I knew that girl was going to become someone remarkable no matter what she picked. When she got into Penn State, I cried in my truck in the school parking lot after we dropped off her boxes, and I didn't tell her because I didn't want her worrying about her old man instead of enjoying her first day. That's the thing about loving a kid the way I loved Emily. You do it quietly. You don't need credit. You just need to know that when she needed you, you were there. And for 25 years straight, I was there every single time. By the time Emily graduated college and moved back closer to Pittsburgh, Coleman Heating and Cooling wasn't just a small operation anymore. I had grown it into something real, something with a good name in this city, the kind of company people called first because they trusted the Coleman name meant honest work at a fair price. I had savings. I had property. I had built a life that most guys who started with a used van and a toolbox never get close to. And I want to be clear about something. None of that money ever mattered to me the way people might assume. I didn't build that business to buy fancy cars or take vacations to places I couldn't pronounce. I built it so that Emily would have a soft place to land no matter what happened in her life. I paid off her student loans the year after she graduated without her even asking. I helped with her first apartment deposit. When she needed a reliable car, I didn't hand her a beater. I got her something safe with good tires because my daughter was not going to break down on the side of the road at midnight if I could help it. Every bit of that success was hers as much as mine, and I never once made her feel like she owed me anything for it. That's just what a father does when he's spent his whole life building something with one person in mind. I never imagined that same generosity would one day be used against me, twisted into something that made me look like the villain in my own daughter's story, simply because I dared to keep being the same father I had always been, even after she got married and started listening to someone else's voice instead of her own. Emily met Derek Whitfield at a mutual friend's barbecue about 2 years ago, And I remember the first time she brought him around for Sunday dinner, she was practically glowing, talking about how he worked in finance downtown and had big plans to start his own consulting firm one day. I shook his hand that first night, firm grip, good eye contact, said all the right things about how much he respected what I'd built with the company. I liked him fine at first. He was polished, he was ambitious, and Emily seemed happy in a way I hadn't seen since before her mother passed. I wanted to believe in him because I wanted to believe my daughter had found someone who would treat her the way she deserved. But there were small moments early on that I brushed off because I didn't want to be the overprotective father standing in the way of my daughter's happiness. Little comments about how he grew up around real money, not tradesman money, said with a laugh like it was a joke, except his eyes never laughed along with it. He'd mention his father's law firm and his mother's charity board seats a little too often around me, like he needed me to know exactly where I stood compared to his family. Emily never seemed to notice, or maybe she noticed and decided it didn't matter, because she was falling for him fast, and when you're falling for someone that fast, you don't want anybody pointing out the cracks in the foundation. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that a man who worked hard for his money like Derek claimed to, would respect a man who worked hard for his money too. I wanted so badly to be wrong about that uneasy feeling in my gut, and for a while, I convinced myself that I was. Derek proposed to Emily on a rooftop restaurant downtown, with the whole skyline lit up behind them, and when she called me that night crying happy tears, I felt nothing but joy for her, real joy, the kind that erases every quiet worry you've been carrying. I told her that night I would pay for the wedding, all of it, no questions asked, because that's the kind of thing a father does for his only daughter, and I meant every word of it. But it didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Derek sat across from me at my own kitchen table and laid out his dream of leaving his finance job to start his own consulting firm, and he needed startup capital, $150,000 to be exact. I want you to understand something. I didn't hand that money over blindly. I've run a business for 30 years. I know what a real plan looks like versus a fantasy, and Derek's numbers look solid enough on paper. I told myself I was investing in my daughter's future husband, in the man who was going to take care of her when I wasn't around anymore. On top of the wedding and the loan, I co-signed their mortgage on a house in Fox Chapel because Derek's income alone wasn't quite enough yet to qualify without my name backing it up. In the span of about 4 months, I had my name and my money tied into nearly every major financial decision in their new life together: the wedding venue, the caterer, the flowers, the business loan, the mortgage. I didn't see it as control. I saw it as love, plain and simple. The same kind of love that had me working double shifts 20 years earlier, just so Emily could have new shoes for the school year. I would learn very soon just how differently Derek saw it. Once the wedding planning got underway, I started noticing things shift in a way that made my stomach turn. Derek's mother, Carol, inserted herself into every decision: the venue, the guest list, the seating chart, and somehow every conversation I tried to have about the wedding I was paying for got quietly redirected or dismissed. Emily started saying things like, "Derek's family has a certain way they like things done," when I asked simple questions about budget or vendors. I paid the deposits without complaint because I wasn't trying to buy control over my daughter's big day. I just wanted to be included in the day I was funding. At a tasting dinner in March, Derek made a joke in front of his parents about how his father-in-law probably thought champagne was just fancy beer, and the table laughed, and Emily laughed too, and something in my chest went cold and quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. I let it go. I told myself weddings make everybody a little crazy, that stress brings out strange behavior in people, and that once the wedding was over, things would settle back to normal. But the comments kept coming, small digs about my truck, about my work boots, about how I still smelled like a job site, even when I'd showered and changed before coming over. Emily stopped defending me the way she used to. She used to be the first person to shut down anyone who disrespected her old man, but now she just went quiet. Or worse, she smiled along with it like she didn't want to rock the boat with her new husband's family. I felt myself being slowly erased from my own daughter's life, replaced by a family that had money, but clearly never learned what it actually costs to earn it. By June, 3 weeks before the wedding, I had paid out over $90,000 for the venue, the catering, the florist, and the band, and I still hadn't been given a single real role in the ceremony beyond writing checks. Derek's father was giving a toast. Derek's mother was walking Emily's bridal party through some tradition from her side of the family. I asked Emily one night over the phone, gently, if I could still walk her down the aisle, and there was a pause on the line long enough to answer the question before she even spoke. "We're still figuring out logistics, Dad," she said, And something about the word logistics coming out of my daughter's mouth about her own father walking her down the aisle nearly broke something in me right there. I didn't push it. I told myself I was overreacting, that stress does strange things to people during wedding season, and that Emily still loved me the same way she always had, deep down, even if she was distracted right now by a man and a family who clearly wanted less of me around and more of my money flowing in. I kept paying every invoice that came through, kept transferring funds into the joint wedding account Emily and I had opened together for exactly this purpose, kept making sure Derek's business account had enough breathing room from that startup loan to keep his new consulting firm afloat during its shaky first year. I was holding up their entire world financially while slowly being pushed out of it emotionally, and I didn't fully understand how far that push would go until one specific message landed on my phone at 5 in the morning, 3 days before the wedding I had paid for in full. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 days before the wedding, and I was up early like always, standing in my kitchen with my coffee, watching the sun come up over my backyard, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up expecting a work message from one of my crews, and instead I saw Emily's name, and my stomach did something strange before I even read the words. Dad, please don't come to the wedding. Derek doesn't want you there. He says you don't respect our life together, and he doesn't want you causing tension in front of his family. I think it's better this way. I'm sorry. I stood there in my kitchen and read that message 3 times, slow, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My own daughter, the little girl I raised alone for 18 years, the woman whose wedding I had paid nearly $100,000 for, whose fiancé's business I had funded with my retirement savings, whose mortgage carried my name and my credit, was telling me to skip her wedding because her husband didn't like me. I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as a door quietly closing, not slamming, just closing, firm and final. I didn't call her screaming. I didn't text back begging to be let back in. I set the phone down on the counter, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time in months, everything made perfect sense. I finally understood exactly where I stood with these two people, and more importantly, I finally remembered exactly what I actually controlled in their entire financial life together. Every account, every loan, every dollar flowing through their world had my fingerprints on it, and none of it had gone anywhere yet. I didn't make a single move that morning out of anger, because anger makes men sloppy, and I have never once in 30 years of running a business made a sloppy decision when real money was on the line. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and I thought it through with a clear head, the same way I'd think through a major contract or a business decision that could make or break my company. Here's what I knew for certain. The wedding venue deposit, the remaining balance owed to the caterer and florist, all of it was sitting in a joint account that Emily and I had set up together, an account where I was the primary holder because Emily hadn't built up enough credit history yet to open it alone. The startup loan to Derek's consulting firm wasn't a gift. It was a private loan with a signed agreement, one that included a due-on-demand clause my own lawyer had insisted on including because 30 years in business teaches you to protect yourself even when you love the person you're lending to. And the mortgage on their house in Fox Chapel had my name as a co-signer, which meant I had rights and responsibilities tied to that loan that Derek clearly hadn't thought through when he decided I wasn't welcome at his wedding. I sat there with my coffee going cold for the second time that morning, and I realized something simple and clear. These two people had built their entire new life on a foundation made of my money, my credit, and my signature, and they had just told me I wasn't good enough to stand in the room and watch it happen. So I decided, calmly and completely, that if I wasn't welcome at the wedding, then none of what I had built for them was welcome to keep standing either. At 9 in the morning, I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Nguyen, who had handled every contract for my business for over a decade, and I told her exactly what I wanted done. First, I wanted the joint wedding account frozen immediately, which was well within my rights as the primary account holder, since every dollar in that account had come from my transfers in the first place. Patricia made one call to the bank, and within the hour, every pending payment to the venue, the caterer, and the florist was placed on hold pending my personal authorization I had no intention of giving. Second, I invoked the due-on-demand clause on Derek's business loan, which meant the full remaining balance of the loan was now legally due in full, effective immediately, a clause Derek had signed without reading closely enough, because when a man that confident is handed free money, He rarely stops to read the fine print. Third, I contacted the mortgage lender about my position as cosigner and formally began the process of removing myself from the loan, a process that would trigger an immediate review of Derek and Emily's ability to carry that mortgage on his income alone, since his income had never actually qualified without my name attached. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't trying to destroy my daughter's life. I was simply removing myself, completely and legally, from a financial structure I was no longer welcome to be part of emotionally. If Derek didn't want me in the room, then he didn't get to keep using my name to hold his entire world together while I sat outside in the parking lot of his life. By noon that day, every phone call had been made, every form had been signed, and the entire financial foundation of their upcoming wedding and their new life together had quietly, legally, and completely come apart. The venue called Emily first, a woman named Denise from the events office, explaining that the deposit account showed a hold and the remaining balance hadn't cleared, and without full payment 48 hours before the event, they could not guarantee the space. The caterer called next, then the florist, then the band, each one polite but firm, explaining the same basic fact: no confirmed final payment meant no confirmed services. I know all of this because Denise from the venue actually called me directly first, out of professional courtesy, since my name was still listed as the account holder, and I told her calmly that the hold was intentional and there would be no further authorization from me. Meanwhile, over at Derek's brand new consulting office, his business bank account had been notified of the loan recall. And since his firm was barely 6 months old with more expenses than income, there was no possible way for him to produce $150,000 in cash on short notice. His office manager later told a mutual acquaintance that Derek spent that entire Tuesday afternoon on the phone with 3 different banks, trying to secure emergency financing, getting rejected by every single one because a business with 6 months of history and no real collateral doesn't qualify for that kind of loan overnight. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, the mortgage lender sent Emily and Derek a formal notice that their cosigner had begun withdrawal proceedings, which meant their monthly payment amount was about to be reassessed based on Derek's income alone, an amount that, according to the lender's own numbers, he could not currently afford by a significant margin. By 6 o'clock that evening, 3 days before their wedding, Emily and Derek's entire carefully built life had started coming apart at every seam simultaneously, and neither one of them yet understood that I was the reason why. 2 days later, on what was supposed to be their wedding day, I sat at home in my own kitchen, drinking my coffee at the same table where I'd read that text message 4 days earlier. I hadn't spoken to Emily since that morning, and I hadn't reached out, because I wasn't the one who decided I shouldn't be there. Around 10 in the morning, my neighbor Clara, who happened to know one of the wedding vendors through her church group, mentioned to me over the fence that she'd heard the venue had been quietly canceled the day before, something about a payment issue, and that the caterer had pulled out entirely. She didn't know I was involved. She had no idea that the man watering his tomato plants had personally frozen the entire event with 3 phone calls. By noon, I heard from another source, an old family friend who was still invited to the wedding, that guests had shown up to find a locked venue with a small handwritten sign taped to the door, and that Derek's mother Carol had been standing outside in her mother of the groom dress, making frantic phone calls, trying to figure out what had happened to a wedding that had been fully paid for just weeks earlier. Emily, I later learned, had spent the morning in tears in her childhood bedroom, the one down the hall from mine, because it turned out her new in-laws' beautiful lake house wasn't actually available that day either. There was no backup plan, no plan B venue, because Derek and his family had assumed, the same way they'd assumed about everything else, that the money would simply always be there because it always had been. What none of them understood yet was that the money had a name attached to it, and that name had just decided he was done being invisible in his own daughter's life. I woke up the next morning at 5:30, same as always, and reached for my phone on the nightstand out of habit before I even opened my eyes. The screen was lit up with notifications stacked so high the number at the top simply read 99 plus, and when I actually opened it, I counted 118 missed calls between the two of them, 41 from Derek and 77 from Emily, along with dozens of text messages sent through the night, starting angry and confused around midnight and slowly turning desperate and apologetic by 4 in the morning. Emily's messages went from, "Dad, what did you do?" to, "Dad, please, I don't understand what's happening," to finally around 4:15, "Dad, I'm so sorry, please call me. I didn't know it would go this far. I love you." I sat on the edge of my bed and read every single message slowly, and I felt something complicated. Not joy exactly, but not sadness either. Something closer to a strange, heavy relief, the feeling of finally being seen clearly by the one person whose vision of me had gotten blurry for a while. I made coffee, same as every morning, and I let the phone sit quiet on the counter for another hour while I drank it, because I had learned a long time ago that the calm always has to come before the conversation, or the conversation goes nowhere good. Around 7, my phone rang one more time, and this time it was Emily, and this time I picked it up on the third ring, and her voice came through thin and shaking, nothing like the confident young woman who had told me to skip her own wedding 4 days earlier. "Dad," she said, and then she just cried for a long moment before she could say anything else at all. I let Emily cry for a moment before I spoke, and when I finally did, my voice came out calm and steady, not cold, just clear. "I froze the accounts, Emily, all of them. The wedding fund, Derek's loan, my name on your mortgage. I did it the same morning you told me I wasn't welcome in your life." She apologized over and over, said Derek hadn't meant it the way it sounded, said she'd made a horrible mistake, said she wanted to fix everything. I told her the truth as gently as I could manage. "I never needed a seat at that wedding to prove I was your father, Emily. I needed you to remember that I already was one, every single day for 25 years, long before Derek ever walked into a barbecue and decided my truck and my work boots made me less than his family." We talked for almost 2 hours that morning, and I told her clearly what I needed moving forward. Not money, not control, just honesty and respect. The same two things I had given her since the day her mother passed. I told her the business loan to Derek would be restructured on fair terms, but only if he sat across from me like a man and had an honest conversation. No more jokes about tradesmen at dinner tables. I told her I would consider staying on the mortgage, but only if I was treated like her father again, not an inconvenient wallet standing outside the family photo. It took months, real conversations, real humility from both of them, before things settled into something honest again, and Derek, to his credit, eventually sat at my kitchen table and apologized like a man who finally understood exactly what he'd almost lost. I walked my daughter down the aisle 6 months later at a small ceremony in my own backyard, just family, no performance, no pretending, and when she took my arm, she looked at me and said, "This is the only wedding that ever mattered anyway." If you made it to the end of this story, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more real family stories like this one. I'll see you in the